Thank you very much for our friends from the media for joining us here today. I will be making some statements from the Automotive Retailers Association, and I'll be happy to answer your questions after those statements. So a little bit about the Automotive Retailers Association. We represent the aftermarket automotive sector in BC. Everything from collision and mechanical repair, glass repair and recovery, automotive recyclers, towing recovery, and the licensed dealers, auto rental, and motorcycle and power sports. So we like to say pretty much everything other than new car dealers, and even some of those are our members if they're servicing vehicles. Obviously, because of the nature of the work that our members do, and we have roughly 1,000 members in the province, the announcements by Attorney General David Eby recently about the financial condition of ICBC is extremely concerning for our industry. Since ICBC, through their policyholders in the vehicle service sector, accounts for the vast majority, frankly, of the service industry in BC, in some sectors as much as 60 or 80% of the value of the business. Obviously, any conditions at ICBC that adversely impact that are significant concerns to us. Last November, we dealt with allegations by some that body shops in the province were overbilling on ICBC work. We invited the media out and demonstrated the safeguards and protocols in place through ICBC, through estimating software and other tools to ensure that that type of thing does not happen. Those that spoke against shops and suggesting they were overbilling have yet to date provided any evidence in support of their allegations. But I'm not here to talk about that. As I said, I think we effectively addressed that last fall. Minister Eby, who is in charge of ICBC now since they formed government and were sworn in last July, has mentioned that vehicle repair costs have increased by 30% over the last 2 years. If we accept the minister's numbers and ICBC's numbers, and we have no reason not to, we would have to say that we fully agree. We've certainly seen a significant increase in the value of those repairs as well. I think by putting those numbers out there and suggesting that body shops and automotive service providers will be impacted by that, it might leave your listeners, the public, with the impression that shops are conducting themselves in a manner that are escalating those costs. In fact, the body shops in this province have little or no control whatsoever on those costs. I think it's not too much of a stretch for the public to understand that vehicles are getting more expensive. There are the demand on vehicles through automation, through technology, with lane departure warnings, with headlights that track the movement of the vehicle, with the automatic controls and the cameras involved, not to mention the things that the public you generally don't see in your vehicle, which is all the composite materials and different metals that are used in the construction of vehicles. All of these have a significant cost impact on vehicle repairs. Again, nothing that our industry has any control over. So while those costs have increased by 30%, if that's the number, I can assure you that it's not the body shops that are reaping the benefits of those escalating costs. In fact, quite the opposite. While rates have not increased for our industry, in the collision side, there's been no significant increase in about 5 to 8 years. In other sectors, like automotive glass, they haven't had a rate increase for labor rate in as much as 20 years. At the same time, with advancements in vehicle manufacture and the expectation of fixing those vehicles, they've had to invest, shops have had to invest heavily in equipment, tools, and machinery. Tens of thousands of dollars just to stay in business and serve the public in having their vehicles fixed. Again, it's vehicle manufacturers that are setting the standards for those repair. It's the manufacturers and the parts companies obviously setting the prices for the parts that go into fixing those vehicles. And there is, as I mentioned earlier, software systems used by ICBC and the body shops that monitor how the body shops are conducting themselves in meeting those service requirements. So the safeguards are in place there as well. Our concern is that our industry, through these announcements, might end up being used as a scapegoat, quite frankly, for the escalating costs at ICBC. I should point out, of the $4 billion in annual claims costs at ICBC, the material damage side, which is vehicle repair, is only about 15%. And I say only, obviously that's still a significant number. But it's our belief that the bodily injury side, the claims, is a far more significant issue, and we don't want to see the automotive service sector be seen as an opportunity for the government to cut costs further, quite frankly at a time when the service industry is struggling already. We're not the problem, but we do want to be part of the solution. We have met with this government numerous times. We've met with the Attorney General, Minister Eby, who's responsible for ICBC. We have made proposals that are intended to open a dialogue with the minister on some solutions on how we believe we could assist in partnership with ICBC and government in reducing costs. We've actually developed here at the Automotive Retailers Association an industry certification program which sets standards of performance, which complement manufacturer standards. And actually our program that we developed here in BC has been adopted as a national standard, something that we're very proud of. We believe that in partnership with ICBC and government, if we have the support and endorsement of government, by adopting those standards of performance, we believe that we can assume a lot of the responsibilities currently done by ICBC employees, making the process not only improve the quality of the repairs that are being done, but the cycle times as well, which ultimately results in faster, our ability to return the vehicles to the owners much more quickly. We also believe that, as I mentioned, we represent the automotive recycle sector. We believe that some changes in policies at ICBC that would result in improved access to aftermarket used parts will have a significant impact in reducing costs for ICBC as well. There is a requirement right now at ICBC or through ICBC in partnership with our automotive collision repair shops for utilizing a minimum percentage of recycled parts in manufacture. What I can tell you is that between 2011 and 2017, requests by body shops for recycled parts has gone up 37%, when in fact the satisfying that demand by the body shops has reduced by roughly 3%. It's making it much, much more difficult for our industry to access used parts to keep those costs down. So, as I said, we believe we've got some ideas working with government and ICBC on how we can be part of that solution, and we think the economies are there to make sure that not only is ICBC's costs reduced, but that we're ensuring the future viability and sustainability of our automotive service sector. It is, after all, ICBC's policyholders are our customers as well, and we have every intention of making sure we're satisfying that demand. So, with that said, I'm open to any questions that any of you may have, and that includes our media partners on the phone.
Sure, I got one. If you're proposing using recycled parts, what mechanism would you propose to make sure these recycled parts are good enough?
We actually, again, our certification programs, I mentioned the program that we have for collision repair. We've actually developed a certification program for auto recyclers as well, where recyclers are properly trained on how to grade recycled parts so that they meet the standards required for the body shops. The last thing we want is body shops purchasing recycled parts and having to spend twice as much time as they would with a new part in installing those on the vehicles. So the intent would be to use a manufactured OEM or original equipment manufacturer part that is made specifically for that vehicle, that's properly graded to an A level, so to speak, that could be used in those vehicles.
So you wouldn't see an increased cost on the used part because of that system?
No, not at all. It's strictly our issue is about access to recycled parts. Right now, the way ICBC, because obviously they own salvaged vehicles once the policyholders have been paid out and that salvage goes to ICBC. Our recyclers are not able to bid effectively on those lots or those vehicles, and often brokers and recyclers that have the ability to bid, we're led to understand that a lot of those vehicles are being put in containers and shipped out of province. So we're just not getting access to the parts.
Do you not see any problem, bottom line, with the people who are getting paid determining how much the total bill is?
Yeah. I'm sorry, what's the question? Do I see a
Do you
problem with that?
at all?
Well, I suppose I would totally understand if that was the case, and that's not the case. When we talk about setting our certification standards and establishing standards of performance, we're not talking about doing it in a bubble. We would obviously have every expectation that there would be audit and inspection protocols put in place, in this case with ICBC, that they would be monitoring or continuing to monitor how the shops operate, and they could do audits at any time on any vehicle repair to make sure that they meet the standards. And I should point out that it's not currently the shops that are setting those standards, and we're not suggesting that the pricing, we're not suggesting that the shops would do that in isolation. As I said, there is an estimating software through Mitchell that ICBC uses that establishes the labor rates and the times it takes to fix a vehicle, and the manufacturers control the prices. All we're suggesting through our program is that the industry has the ability to fix those vehicles without all the administration that, quite frankly, adds a significant amount of time and cost to ICBC. We would still be expected to be subject to audits and inspections.
But is ICBC doing that auditing at the rate it used to?
You know, I can't say that they're necessarily doing it at the rate that they used to. I mentioned before that last November there were allegations that some shops were overbilling ICBC. The protocols are in place to ensure that that doesn't happen. If in fact there are some shops that have been billing in excess of what the software and the programs allow, we would expect ICBC to enforce their own programs and policies.
Some would say that it's not the parts, it's the labor cost that is increased dramatically. What do you have to say on that?
I'm not sure, those some people that you are referring to, I'm not sure where they're getting their information from. Over the last 8 years, the labor rate, which ICBC sets those rates, and they can do so unilaterally without any input from industry whatsoever. In the collision repair sector, over the last 8 to 10 years, there's been about a 4% increase. You can imagine what has happened in terms of the costs associated with hiring labor over that time period. We're actually losing ground. And as I mentioned, other than collision, you look at automotive glass repair or towing and recovery. Glass repair hasn't had a labor rate increase or a significant labor rate increase for almost 20 years. So it's not escalating labor costs. In fact, we continue to struggle as among the lowest paid technical trades in the province. And we need to correct that if we're going to continue to offer services in this province.
The solution you're proposing is, how much can you expect that this would save? And is it enough to make a significant impact?
Well, it obviously depends on how far government and ICBC might be willing to work with us in advancing that. We are suggesting, just with our certification program alone, the savings could be in excess of $10 million.
A year?
A year. That's just one solution and one, to what is the current problem. I said before, of the challenges that ICBC is facing, the significant deficit, most of this is on the bodily injury side, which is why you've heard most about the bodily injury. The government's attention will be primarily focused there. We're just offering to do as much as we can for our part.
You mentioned you feel your industry is a scapegoat. Why do you say that?
It's comments, again, I go back to last November when ICBC's union made allegations of body shops overbilling. They provided no proof, no evidence, they just made statements. By contrast, we invited media out and actually demonstrated how the system is set up to ensure that that doesn't happen. There were comments in media by the government that suggested they wouldn't be surprised if body shops were overbilling, and some other comments. We don't want the public to have the impression that body shops or automotive service providers are part of the problem. In fact, as I said before, we're about as lean as we possibly can, and the profit margins for shops are quite frankly so low as to be unsustainable if things don't change.
You don't think there's a popular public opinion that body shops are overbilling?
You know, we understand the public opinion side of it. I liken automotive repair to going to the dentist. You know you have to fix your teeth or maintain your teeth, but nobody likes paying the bills. Automotive vehicles are the number one or number two most significant cost that any family or individual will take on. You know you need to maintain your vehicle and repair them, but nobody likes paying the bills. So the public may be, and that's what we're concerned about, they might be quick to assume that the service sector is part of the problem here. We're trying to get in front of this, particularly in light of the Attorney General's comments on Monday. To make sure that the public understands we're not only not part of the problem, we want very much to be part of the solution going forward.
You acknowledge, though, that the auditing is not happening at the rate it used to. Would you be in favor?
I'm sorry?
You acknowledge the auditing is not happening at the rate it used to. Would you be in favor of more oversight if they step that up?
Oh, actually, I didn't say it. What I said was I'm not sure whether the auditing is happening at the same rate. Our industry has absolutely no concerns whatsoever, and certainly nothing to hide by ICBC increasing or doing more audits. In fact, with the adoption of the standards of performance and certification that we're proposing, we would welcome it.
Mercedes C43 crashed into a grocery store this morning. And so I imagine
Okay.
So I imagine typical day, right?
Yeah.
I imagine what would happen in that situation is, as you're saying, they would go and source some of the parts new.
If they're available,
if
yes.
they're available. So can you give me an example? It doesn't have to be Mercedes, but we have
Sure.
footage of it, so it'd be nice if it was. Have an example of a part that's new versus a part that's used, what the cost difference
Oh.
would be, and how, you know,
Sure.
what that would look like for that kind of
Well,
part.
I'll give you an example, but it's more of a hypothetical. There are some vehicles, whether those are, I don't want to use manufacturers' names, I don't think that would be necessarily be fair, but some of the higher end vehicles in the Mercedes equivalent, where a headlight alone is $12,000 to replace. A minor bumper incident that on the surface would seem, as I said, quite minor, could have tens of thousands of dollars in damage as a result of the repairs requiring making sure that they're compatible then again with all the technology in the vehicle afterwards. That part of through an auto recycler would be a fraction of that cost. And again, as I mentioned, specifically made for that vehicle.
So the headlight is a good example.
It's a good
What
example.
kind of savings would you get on a headlight?
You could get that, I imagine you get that headlight for under $2,000.
So why haven't you been doing that already?
We do, provided that our shops, our recyclers have access to those vehicles. As I said before, when we bid on them, our auto recyclers are frequently losing out to others that are bidding on those vehicles so that they can ship them out of province to markets where they can get higher profits for those vehicles and those parts. Typically, they're being rebuilt or being sold in other markets in Asia or Middle East or elsewhere for far, far more than we can get in our marketplace here. What we're saying is having those parts from ICBC, having those parts available here in the province will have a significant impact on reducing the cost of repairs. We just have to make sure that those recycled parts are staying in province.
How can we make sure that happens?
That will require discussion and dialogue with ICBC and government to change their policies to make sure that our recyclers are getting preferred access to it.
And how much money would that cost them? I mean, if the overseas recyclers are bidding you, what kind of money are we talking that they would lose if they gave you for access?
I don't have the actual numbers on what they're getting for those lots that are going out of province, but it's not just about the money. This government and the previous government have made commitments to environmental protection and sustainability, to access to quality repairs at the lowest costs. So they have to factor in these policy decisions and balance them out against the dollars. If in fact it's a significant cost, then they need to weigh that against those other policy decisions. I mentioned before that we actually participated in an independent third-party review that MNP did at the direction of government that we participated in, ICBC participated in, government participated in, and they did a full review of all of these sectors that are impacted by ICBC. Their recommendations included a review by ICBC and government on these policies to determine what the financial impact is relative to those policy decisions. Between that and the report indicating that automotive service businesses are need to have their compensation reviewed. None of the recommendations of that report, which was completed in 2016, have ever been acted on. And again, that wasn't our report, that was an independent third-party review by a consultant. I'm not sure what the PwC report that's coming out in the next couple of weeks will say that's any different. All I can say is that we didn't actually have any direct input to what PwC was doing, other than the proposals that we delivered to the government last September, which, as I said, were only supposed to be dialogue openers, but included some of the things that I'm talking about here today. Is there any questions on the conference call?
I think they've mostly been answered.
All right.
I'd say, I mean, the root of this, I mean, you're right, it's more repairs, but it's also crashes.
Severity, yeah.
As well, and severity. I mean, what do you propose to resolve that factor? Is there anything that?
Well, you know, I mean, there's a lot of things involved in this. Severity is actually, and that's the cost of fixing those repairs, is getting more and more expensive all the time, which is obviously a factor of the more expensive vehicles and the parts that go into them. Then there's also the issues that I know ICBC is trying to address around, I guess, the human factor. There's not much that our industry can do about the human factor, the human element in it. We just fix vehicles. I'm sure ICBC will address those issues, or the government will address those issues the best they can. The only thing we can suggest by way of recommendations to government is offering incentives to vehicle owners to ensure vehicles of a certain age are inspected on a periodic basis to make sure at least that vehicle condition is not a contributing factor in any of those accidents.
Speaking of the human factor, I mean, we're getting closer to having driverless cars on the road. I don't think we have any tests here in the province. I don't
No.
think we're doing any research really. We're living in Silicon Valley. Is that the kind of thing that ICBC should take a lead on if it's going to reduce the human error?
Well, I think they probably are. I don't think it's a stretch to assume that insurance companies throughout the world, quite frankly, will at some point be establishing policies and incentives to encourage people to drive vehicles with that automation in the vehicles. Well, assuming, of course, that automation will have an impact in reducing the number of accidents. I think intuitively we can assume that that automation will have that impact. When? Is that 5 years, 20 years from now? As long as there are people on the road driving vehicles that don't have that automation, I would suggest to you that there's not going to be it's not going to be as rapid a change as perhaps some manufacturers would like to think. As I said, the average age of the vehicles in this province is getting older, not younger.
Do you think we should be charging people insurance based on how much they drive instead of?
Well, again, I'm not an insurance expert, but I am also a policy holder and a driver myself. Quite frankly, I think that people should be charged according to what they're driving. Absolutely. I don't think that people that are driving $40,000 vehicles should be subsidizing people that are driving $140,000 vehicles. I think people should be paying accordingly. If you're going to purchase expensive vehicles, part of that should include the expectation that your insurance premiums are going to be adjusted accordingly.
Are there any other questions on the conference call? Anybody on the conference call?
Yeah, no other questions, I don't think.
No further questions, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for your time. Appreciate it.